A powder keg waiting to explode. That's how the tragic and unabated poverty and youth unemployment rates were described during the unprecedented July 2021 unrest. The worst we've seen in post-apartheid South Africa that resulted in billions rather, worth of damage. Good evening and welcome to Democracy 30. My name is Oliver Dixon. Thank you so much for joining us. Youth unemployment is one of South Africa's most tragic stories in the country's 30 years of democracy. As part of our Youth Month focus, we asked the question, why have unemployment initiatives failed to address youth unemployment in the past 30 years? And joining me to understand the state of affairs is Wasim Karim, the CEO of the National Youth Development Agency, as well as Zangeziwe Msimang from the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. But first, let's take a look at this insert for context.
Born free and fit for the future, these students should reap the rewards of the 1976 student uprisings and the birth of democracy in 1994. But millions of this generation are unable to participate fully in the economy, despite the fact that South Africans between the ages of 15 and 35 make up a significant and rapidly growing part of the population.
Youth unemployment is a real big issue. It's a real concern for me because I'm also a youth and I see other friends and youth of mine still looking for jobs.
According to Stats SA, in the first quarter of 2024, almost 60% of youth between 15 and 24 years were unemployed. And a recent survey by Youth Capital, an advocacy campaign to reduce youth unemployment, reveals this burden is exacerbated by the cost of looking for work. Over the past 30 years, government has introduced initiatives to address the challenges with varying success. These include the 2008 establishment of the National Youth Development Agency.
All the challenges that young people are facing, we can actually find collective, solutions to them.
The expanded Public Works Programme and the Employment Tax Initiative are other government programs. In 2018, in partnership with the private sector, President Cyril Ramaphosa launched YES, a youth employment service that offers jobless youth paid work experiences and technical skills for formal jobs.
It is responding to what we perhaps can call the greatest and most pressing social and economic challenge facing our country.
But initiatives like YES have become a no for some desperate youths countrywide who have fallen prey to false promises of career training. Then in 2020, there was the multi-sectoral Presidential Youth Employment Intervention that formed part of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program provided after COVID-19.
We provide them with business management training so that they're able to have a holistic experience.
These policies and programs must be implemented to unlock youth potential, empowering the born-free generation with the freedom and opportunities to thrive.
9 million young South Africans are languishing away hopelessly in unemployment today. Many initiatives and interventions have been brought about to help them get into formal employment, to make a living, to safeguard themselves against the tyranny of poverty. But none seems to have been greatly successful. Why has that been the case? Joining me to have this conversation is Zangeziwe Msimang, who is with the Harambee Youth Accelerator, as well as Wasim Karim of the NYDA. Zan, I'm going to start with you. Why have we not been able to make a dent? 9 million, this number just keeps shooting up, running away from us effectively. Unemployment for young people is a runaway problem. What have we not been able to get right with the plethora of interventions that have been brought about? The YES program, TSEPO 1 million in Gauteng at some point, which Harambee was a partner to, in fact. Nasispan is what it's called these days, right? Yeah. It finds a rebranding in various provinces in various ways, but it just doesn't seem to solve the problem. Why has that been the case?
I think there's a number of issues that have really prevented these programs from working in the way that we need them to. And I think one of the biggest issues is that there's a lot of siloed engagements. And so you don't find that people are working together towards this one kind of national coordinated plan. And so I don't think it's an absence of good intentions. I think the programs are there, and there's several of them that are working. However, what we need right now is scale. As you just said, Oliver, we're looking at 9 million unemployed young people. And so I think there really has to be a concerted effort.
Is it scale or is it just the right ideas? Do we have the right ideas around solving the problem?
I think we do have the right ideas around solving the problems. And I think that's really looking at, well, you know, we have the challenge of the economy, which we all know. Economic growth is not happening at the rate that we need to absorb the number of young people that we need to. I mean, every year we have almost 1 million young people entering into the labor market. 20% of them will get into the formal economy and another 20% into the informal economy. And the balance are going to end up not, as you said, engaged, not in employment, not in education, not in training. So I think that the ideas are there. The challenge is that how do we come together? You use the example of Nancy Spani. And Nancy Spani is a program that has done a lot in terms of employing young people. But what we've seen often is that a new government or a new administration comes into power, and a lot of those programs don't have continuation. So I think we need to look at how do we look at the challenge, how do we solve it, and look at the different ways we have of solving it, but doing so together and not having a kind of piecemeal approach with the private sector doing X, government doing X, and then civil society doing X. We need to come together and get
Where is the
behind
lack of
one plan.
appetite? Is it the private sector not wanting to play ball?
No, I don't think so. The private sector has actually done a lot of work in terms of, you mentioned the YES initiative in your intro, but I think that it is, one, from a private sector perspective, looking at inclusive hiring, that we have to do more as the private sector to make sure that young people get their foot through the door. You know, you find things like young people, for example, organizations will have exclusionary practices. You know, you need to have 5 years work experience in order to get this job. But do you really? So I think business needs to also look at how do they hire inclusively? How do they lower some of the barriers that young people are facing to entering into the formal work market? So
Yeah.
I definitely think that there are solutions. It's really about combining those solutions and making sure that we work together across society in order to deal with them.
I want to bring this to, and I wanted to, going off of that last thought, organizations in the private sector working with exclusionary practices, like you have to have 5 years experience to be able to be a part of this. In fact, if you look at the legal profession, the Legal Practice Council, for instance, ambassador law firms saying to candidate attorneys, you must have a car to be able to apply for this job or be a part of this job. The thing about saying somebody must have 5 years experience to have a job is because companies realize that the cost of training somebody to be job ready once you hire them is insanely high, pushes up their overheads, makes it more expensive to run a business, and you have no guarantee you're going to be able to keep that person for long enough to be able to recuperate that time value. That means that we're not producing young people that are job ready, it seems. The NYDA is not just about giving money to businesses, it's also about developing skills and coordinating all of these sorts of efforts. Why is it then that we have young people leaving institutions of higher learning, and we'll get to young people who never even make it into institutions of higher learning, who are not job ready?
So thanks, Oliver. And you know, I want to partially agree with saying about initiatives not working in consolidation with one another, right? But I also think there's a larger primary problem. I think there's a lot of secondary problems, but there's a huge primary problem, which is South Africa's economy has not grown fundamentally for now more than a decade. We're entering the second decade of very low economic growth, right? And if you look around the world, right, countries that have been able to solve unemployment are countries which grow at 4% plus a year, right? So we have to tackle that primary problem. Everything else, I actually think South Africa is well set up developmentally. We've got good development institutions. But if the economy doesn't grow, it means as much as you can cater for work experience or entrepreneurship or whatever else, there's no demand that young people are entering into, right? As much as you skill and train them, there's no demand on the other side that they are able to enter into. So we have to fix that problem. Structural reforms to fix economic growth are critical if we're going to solve the problem. Which brings me to the point that you've made then, right? Let's take it back to the perspective of a young person. And we have to accept that many of our young people are marginalized, they are vulnerable in nature. So a young person entering the workforce for the first time often comes sometimes from a household where nobody in that household has been employed, where they don't have the right mentors, where they don't have the right kind of role models, right? And therefore programs like the ones run, for example, your National Youth Service, your Youth Employment Service, your expanded public works, are critical in giving young people a first step into the labor market, where they can understand what is required from a conflict management, negotiation skills, timekeeping, work readiness, right? And I think where the intervention comes about is with initiatives like we have a National Pathway Management Network, is then to work in collaboration with the private sector to say, these are young people which are much better, much more work ready, because they've gone through a National Youth Service, they've gone through a Youth Employment Service, where government has carried the cost of training those young people. Often when we talk to employers in the private sector, they say to us, but we can't find these young people. You know, we speak to hospitality groups who work in rural areas in South Africa, and they say we can't find workers. And we say, well, that's where government and civil society comes in to bridge the gap. It has to happen at scale, right? And it can't happen without my first point, which is massive amounts of economic growth.
The thing about economic growth is that during the years we had economic growth of 4, 5, and at our peak around 6%. Those years were often described as jobless growth, right? And it makes us suspicious about the relationship between economic growth as a necessary requirement for unemployment to be subdued. I say this bearing in mind that graduate unemployment is in single digit in South Africa. You have 90% of a chance getting a job if you have a degree in South Africa. The real problem is unemployment of unskilled laborers, right? Even if the economy were to grow, would the economy be able to absorb people who have no formal education outside of high school?
No. And I think that what is really important is that, you know, when you were talking about the greater challenges, there are challenges within the education system that need to get fixed. And we also need to look at the challenges in the skilling system and try and figure out how do we make sure that we're able to get young people skilled for the work of the future? How do we make sure that we've heard a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, right? Which has taken place over that last 30 years. And there's a huge, huge opportunity within the digital skills, for example. And to Wasim's point, you find companies that are saying, no, we're not able to find young people that are skilled in digital skills. And so a huge part of what we need to do is make sure that young people are skills ready for the skills of the future. And I think I just wanted to go back to your other point earlier about companies in terms of inclusive hiring. And a lot of the work that we've done and the research that we've done through some of our partnerships, particularly I think in the global business sector, is looking at the retention rates of hiring young people. And if you look at, yes, there's an upfront cost that I think business is a little bit scared of, but you look at the retention rates, the productivity rates, and it really shows that young people, once given the correct skills and once getting their foot through the door, will actually stay longer than you would have in your regular or non-impact hires. So there's a lot to be said for how do we look at the zones of opportunity across the economy? Where are the jobs that exist now today? Where are the jobs that we can mine? And then importantly, how do we skill young people to match those opportunities?
Yeah. What is the more fundamental problem? The economic growth, which has a suspicious relationship between economic growth and the absorption of unemployed young people, or young people just not having the skills to be able to be absorbed into the economy. That is to say, unskilled young people.
So it's a bit of both, right? And I want to challenge you on the jobless growth issue, right? Because if we go back to 2008, unemployment in South Africa was 22%. Yes, still high, but the lowest it's been in our democratic history, right? So there was a correlation between the year 2000 and 2008 when we grew, right? Because you look at unemployment today, it's plus 30% plus, right? So it's gradually gone up, correlating with the fact that we've not had economic growth, right? So I think that was the narrative at the time, because many people fought the policies that were in place at that period of time. But we do know, even if we don't want to look at South Africa, we want to look at Asia, for example, we know there's correlations between a growing economy. Yes, that growth must be inclusive, but I do maintain that that is critical here, right? The second part of your question is also important, right? Is that our skill system has to shift. And I actually think, again, South Africa has a very decent policy environment for skills. Think about our CETA system, right? We've gone and established a framework that says we're going to take a percentage of companies' payrolls. It's going to get paid into a special skills development fund, which is used to both train existing workers to make sure they keep up with trends, as well as new and emerging workers, right? That's very progressive policy, yeah? Now, where does the gap come about, right? You'll often, when you talk to young people...
Can I pause you there, Wasim, because I do want us to come back to the inefficiencies and inefficacies that CETA programs have presented itself with, that I think we do need to unpack.
That's what I want to
take a break, and after the break, we'll deep dive into that with greater detail. Of course, you're watching Democracy 30, and we will continue these discussions. Let us know what some of your thoughts are. Tweet us. It is at SABC News, hashtag Democracy 30, or myself at Oliver_speaking. We'll continue the conversation on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Democracy 30. We are still in discussion with Wasim Karim, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Youth Development Agency, and Zangeziwe Msimang from the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. And we are asking the question, why has the various youth unemployment initiatives failed to make a dent in the youth unemployment problem in South Africa? Let's take a look at some of the numbers that have defined the trends of youth employment and unemployment over the last 30 years or so in South Africa's democracy. Let's take a look at this graph. This graph focuses on youth unemployment between 1995 and 2022 with a focus on 15 to 24-year-old young people. Now, if you take a look at this trend, youth unemployment was hovering just above 36% in 1995 and somewhat remained steady all the way up until 2010. Something weird happened in 2010. Seems to have an answer for that, where youth unemployment drastically shot up to just beneath 46% over there. And it has declined since, but then shot up once again to a point in 2022 where almost 1 in 2 young South Africans are sitting without a job. What happened in 2010, Wasim?
Well, we had the global financial crisis. And while most economies went into recovery, South Africa had probably its first bouts of load shedding, which has continued unabated for 14 years, where we seem to have solved the issue now. So that global financial crisis, which affected the whole world, South Africa was not badly positioned. But since then, we've scored so many own goals, be it in energy, logistics, crime, politics, that our economy has not expanded like the rest of the world. And that has directly impacted on our young people.
But there must be a more stronger correlative effect between that sharp shoot up in 2010 which isn't how general unemployment in 2010 shot up in South Africa. General unemployment did shoot up, but at a much at a less steeper slope than that. So why, Zan, are 15 to 24-year-olds a lot more vulnerable than other demographic groups?
Well, I think that it is about entering the labor market and leaving the school system. And if you look at that age group, that really is the age group where what are the skills that they've been given and able to enter into the labor market. I think another important thing is when you look at job creation, you also need to look at the informal economy. And what we have seen is that the informal economy has shot up in the period from 2010 to 2022. And when we were talking earlier about solutions, I think a lot of what we need to be doing is looking at, with the lack of economic growth that we have and the reality that the economy is just not creating enough jobs to absorb the young people that we have, how do we diversify and get young people into entrepreneurship? How do we support them and effectively support them? I think a lot of young people have had to almost zigzag in and out of the economy because they have had to go to NYDA in order to get a grant and then go over and go to other services, and combining that all together and making sure that there's a focus on supporting young people in the informal sector, I think is a huge, huge part of solving this problem.
Of course, South Africa is not a country without its history, which carries a great deal of baggage that rests with us till this day. Let's take a look at this very next graphic that gives us a demographic breakdown of what the impact of youth unemployment has looked like in South Africa over the last 30 years. If you look at the breakdown of black, colored, Indian and white South Africans, particularly young people between the ages of 15 to 24, not in training, not in education and not in employment, this is what that number looks like. It's significantly higher for black and colored people than it is for white people. That trend seems to hold what paints the picture of the history of our country. It once again means that black and colored South Africans are a lot more vulnerable to the disasters of own goals that you had described there since 2010 that has left them hopelessly withering away to the tyranny of unemployment. What particularly are we not getting right when it comes to changing what the demographic picture of unemployment looks like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues there, right? So spatial planning still plays a huge issue, right? The distance between where economic activity is happening and where young people reside is massive in nature, and the cost of that, just the cost of looking for a job, we always speak about how expensive that is. I think too, the migrant labor system and the subsequent breakdown in households. We often speak about young people who come from households where they've never seen an employed person, right? And that doesn't enable them to have the right kind of mentorship to transition into the labor market. And a big one as well is the throughput rate both at basic education and higher education level, right? We've started to show incremental improvements. But if you think about South Africa and the fact that we've achieved nearly universal access to basic education for all young people, it should not be that 30% of young people end up leaving the school system, because we know that is the cohort. Young people who don't have a matric certificate are the most significantly impacted by unemployment. We know the majority of those are black, African or colored in demographics.
Perhaps to ask this, how important, to Wasim's point, how important is the social and cultural grammar in unemployment statistics and the reality thereof? That is to say, if you come from a household where you've had working parents or working relatives, you're more likely to get a job. If you come from a background where you know how to look for a job, that you're more likely to get a job. Those cultural and social grammar particles that makes up the fabric of unemployment, how important are they?
Extremely important. I think we find young people who, as you said, have never had exposure to people who work. Their parents have never had a job. These are critical issues. And at Harambee, I think over the past 13 years, we've had hundreds of thousands of young people coming through our doors. And what we realize is that we have young people who, their basic communication skills, how to show up, how to do a CV, these are all critical elements of finding and keeping work. And it really is an area that we are focusing on, because we find so many young people that are coming from environments where socially, and I think it's larger because it's such a complex issue. So you have households that are child-led still in South Africa today. You also have a lot of young people who not only have not seen people working, but really don't have a clear understanding of what the steps that you need to take are in order to even start job seeking. And I think another important one is, and we've spoken about cost, but when you look at that spatial inequality that we're talking about and the cost of just transport alone to get to different places, there has to be a way of ensuring that young people, data, for example, are able to look for work in a manner that doesn't really put them on the back foot just in terms of where would they even get that money. So socially and culturally, it is so important that we're able to teach young people not just the hows, but how to show up for work and how to maintain their jobs once they've gotten their foot through the door.
Wasim, just perhaps this. The load capacity of social welfare, security and protection at some point is going to implode in this country. What needs to happen between then and now?
So for me, there's three things we can do, and it's an interesting time as we enter the 7th administration, right? I think there's three things we can do to tackle the situation in the next decade. One, the economy has to grow, and many economists say that the structural reforms that are there are going to help the economy to grow. But we often say, it's not fair to say to young people, you must wait for the economy to grow before we can assist you. There's a lot we can do in the interim. The second thing we can do is guarantee every young South African who leaves matric or who leaves university and can't find a job, that the state will guarantee them 12 months of work experience, to enable them to get a foothold in the labor market and sustainably transition into that next opportunity, to break the cycle where young people leave school and completely lose structure in their lives.
Let's have a look at what young people are actually telling us about how they're experiencing unemployment in South Africa. Let's have a listen at these responses of young people on South African streets.
I can't really say that they really created a whole lot of jobs and things like that, because it's what you know and who you know,
I don't believe that government has actually done anything. I mean, we are done with elections and nothing has yet happened. And even before the elections, nothing.
I don't think anyone has done anything for job creation, because it would have been, taking the employment rate down.
I would say yes for the private sector, because they earn on their own. They don't work with the government. So when it comes to job opportunities, I think they have done more in a way that they've gone out there to seek the youth to work for them. So that's how they've created job opportunities.
I feel like even the educational sector we're not being taught. We're taught how to be employers, not employees, not employers.
The private sectors are doing a lot, quite a lot, because they are creating a lot of opportunities for young people in the country.
Yes, they have given few young people opportunities, but not all, because abanye abantu mfethu abana yonke into njengabanye. Some people don't have the funds to go to a college or a university. So what is government doing about that?
I myself am a graduate, and I haven't found the job specs for my qualifications.
Unfortunately, that's all we had time for tonight. Thank you for watching Democracy 30, and thank you to my guest, Wasim Karim, the CEO of the National Youth Development Agency, as well as Zangeziwe, who is with Harambee Youth Accelerator Program. My name is Oliver Dixon. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Stay tuned. Up next, Stories Untold.